these conversations make me nervous because the one area of filmmaking I cannot wrap my mind around is music. Like I've talked to a couple composers on the show. I've talked with a
Mhm.
couple people off air about it. And as much as I appreciate film music, like understanding it from a technical level is something I always struggle to do. So hopefully I'll learn something today as well. But before we dive into what you do, I want to know why you do it. Like, when's the first time that you had that spark to go like, what is this? I'm interested in this category of music.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a great question. So it's not something that I always wanted to do, I always dreamed about, or even something I was really aware of um, until later. I had a pretty big history with music. I started playing drums really early at 4, and a bunch of, rock, actually a bunch of metal bands in high school. Um, and then later in life, I went to school, started studying music production, and I started getting really interested in maybe music business, maybe some, independent record label stuff. And then that from there, I started getting interested in producing. And David
Mhm.
Foster was a big inspiration on what he did and how he was kind of the guy behind all of these hits. And I started getting really intrigued with the whole process of music production. Started putting some things together, and friends and family would be like, "Oh, that sounds like it'd be on a TV show." And I
Hmm.
was always like, "Okay, I don't know what that means. That's not what I was going for."
Yeah.
Um, but then I started learning more and more about music for media and film composing specifically, and then I just fell in love with it. Just kind of
Mhm.
realized that I had more of an intuition towards that type of music production and composing. And then as I got deeper and deeper into it, I just fell in love with that whole world.
Was your initial plan, you mentioned like being a rock band in high school, was like your initial vision looking forward like, oh, I could be in a band? Or was it like always, I don't know how this fits into a career. It's just a fun side thing to do.
A little bit of both, yeah, for sure. I think the band, growing up, we were always like, hoping that maybe we get some sort of record deal or something like
Mhm.
that. And we played, local live shows in Southern California and stuff. But it was also kind of just something on the side. I was also pretty heavily involved in sports, so it was just
Mhm.
something I really enjoyed to do. Always played music, played in church bands growing up too, and um, so something I always kind of did, but never really thought about too much professionally until after I started working and got into the corporate world for a while, and then started reevaluating. Okay, what do I want to do? I've done the corporate gig for a while.
Mhm.
Maybe I could do something with music again. And then that's when I kind of just started to explore. And when I started getting my hands on creating, I found that it just naturally fit more into the film composing side.
Mhm.
My piano teacher at the time knew a film composer named Larry Groupe, up in lived pretty close to around here. He's like, I can introduce you to Larry if you want,
Mhm.
and you can ask him questions. And he's a professional Hollywood film composer.
Yeah.
Met him, took a bunch, asked a bunch of questions, took notes, and then just like I said, the more I got into it, the more I just fell in love with like this is the path I want to go down.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, like, there's probably some people listening to this show who are interested. I mean, if they're listening to the show, they are. I mean, they're interested in the creative side. Some just because they're interested, some because they want a path like that. And
Right.
you took the route. It wasn't like, oh, my dad worked in Hollywood, and then he was like, hey, I'll introduce you, and you have a job. It was like, I'm
No.
going to go the corporate world and then decide to make this jump. For you, did that look like burning the ships and leaving the job and like, I'm going to sleep on someone's couch till I figure this out? Or was it like a strategic, let me try to do this until that income can supplement this income?
Um, it was definitely more of a kind of a mixture. It wasn't super strategic. The job I was at, I was there for 5 years, and I didn't go to school. Like after high school, I'm like, I'm done with school. I just want to start working. So I started
Mhm.
working, had a number of jobs, and then I got into sales, into technology sales, and I did that for about 5 years. Um, and then this company got acquired. This had a bunch of layoffs and everything, and that's what kind of sparked my thinking of like, okay, what do I want to do? I finished. Maybe I should look into university education.
Mhm.
What do I want to do? And that's when I started thinking about music. Like, okay, well, I'm a little too old to continue with any type of sports, really, anything there. But maybe I could do something in just the music world is huge. Entertainment industry is
Mhm.
big. There's so many different ways that you can be involved. Um, and then just started exploring there. And then I found a school Full Sail University that I did a bunch of research. I liked how the professors came from a professional background,
Mm.
and decided that was the best path for me. So fortunately, I did have some money saved up, so I was able to kind of float along for a while,
Mm.
and then just kind of started. I started working for Larry a bit on some projects. He introduced me to his orchestrator, and I worked for him also. So I got a bunch of different part-time jobs while I was learning and just kind of refining the craft. I guess it was more of like an apprenticeship for sure.
Yeah, yeah, that's huge. I'm curious, you mentioned earlier, like people would say, oh, this sounds like it could be in a TV show or in a movie. And like you always, if you start going on YouTube looking at filmmaking stuff, it's like how to make your footage cinematic or how to make this
Yeah,
cinematic. Like those words get thrown around, but it doesn't mean anything. Like if it's in a movie, it's cinematic on some level. But
right.
when you started diving into this and working with Larry and getting into it, like what did you start learning about how film music differed from, say, being in a band or doing something outside of the film space?
Yeah, it so well, and let me know too if this answers the question properly or if there's any follow-up. But I think what's unique is it's like almost like you're writing for a soloist. Like if you're writing concert music and you want to support or even like a singer, you don't want to crowd that person. You want to support the lead. And in film scoring, you're doing I've learned you got to do a lot more of that. You're supporting picture, you're supporting a story, you're trying to tell a story in your own way too.
Mhm.
Larry has said, he looks at himself as a filmmaker because I'm trying to tell a story, communicate through the music. Um, so you're wanting to do that. It's different than just writing a great track or great piece of music that stands alone because now you're trying to complement what's on screen. And if it's really done right too, most people, unless they're big film music buffs, most people don't notice because you get caught up into the drama of what's going on screen. So musically you should be supporting that. And then obviously, I do a lot of action movies. So you got gunshots, you got all this sound effects that's going to be super loud. So again, being sensitive to writing around that and supporting just the whole narrative that's going on screen is the real uniqueness
Mhm.
of writing to picture and something that I guess would be quote unquote cinematic. But I think you're right. When you look up stuff on YouTube or people just thinking, they think cinematic, they think sweeping strings, brass, and they just think
Mhm.
a Hollywood sound. But
Yeah.
obviously, the actual craft is a lot more surgical when you're actually writing the picture. And there's a lot of really talented, amazing songwriters and musicians, but then when they try to write to picture, it's a completely different world.
Yeah.
Um, and directors and producers will typically recognize this too, like, oh, this guy's, or this girl is really great, but I have to like guide them through every single cue or every single frame because they can write a great piece of music, but it's different when you're trying to support dialogue and go around the whole sound effects and Foley and everything else that you're
Right.
not you shouldn't be competing with it, but kind of you're competing, but you're also trying to complement everything really.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I was kind of
It
went off on that.
no, no, it definitely does. And it's something that starting the show, so like so much of the things I've done and the projects I've worked on has been a lot of by myself working on something or someone does something and then it passes to me at the next stage to do something, so like there's a lot of
Right.
freedom to really express exactly what you want to do. And one of the things that's interesting doing the show is I talk to people and you learn more and more how much teamwork happens behind the scenes of so many of these projects. And so, like you said, you're a filmmaker in your own right, but you're also not competing. You're complementing like other people within the project itself. But I am curious, like how this plays out because I know creatives get frustrated when they feel like they don't have final cut or they don't have this, this final decision power here, which ultimately on a movie, nobody really has that. There's an illusion of
Right.
that. Um, so I want to know, like, in your inspirations when you sent over before this, you said like honorary mention like John Williams, which I think every composer has to put that somewhere in that list.
If
When
not,
I
you'll be questioned. Like, yeah, for
exactly
sure.
like, I'm curious, like, so you see someone like John Williams and his music, like every track is very much a character. Like his music is most noticeable. Like you pick it up instantly. It's as iconic as anything else in the film. You look at other composers, like even people like Hans Zimmer, like there's some iconic tracks, but he's doing a lot more just complimenting in a lot of scenes. And there's like one or two that are just like the huge track of the movie. How
Right.
does a composer decide when to be the hero? Like, here's the track. This is the
Mhm.
moment where the track should be noticed versus when should I not be noticed? Like you mentioned earlier.
That's a great question, and it's really cool actually. I was just talking to a friend about this over the weekend. Friend of mine, Tim Tompkins, he was a great filmmaker, been in the business his whole life in different aspects of film production, and a great storyteller. And him and I love to just geek out, nerd out over film music. But he's not musical himself, and he always says that he's like, I know I have the ear, but I don't know. And we were talking exactly about what you just described here, and the time for a composer to really shine is during like a montage type of scene, I guess you could say. When you're seeing the story unfold and there's like it's fades in out or distant dialogue, it's just kind of getting through a certain scene to connect the dots between a major moment. That's when the music can really propel into like, okay, we're basically turning the page to the next chapter. um, so that, and then I mean, with Repeater, we kind of had that opportunity with the end credits when we wrote that the final song. So a lot of slow motion, no dialogue, it's very dramatic, and the music can just really come forefront and drive what's happening in the picture.
Yeah, definitely. No, I was listening to the soundtrack today, walking, and I was thinking about the interview and everything, and I was like, I feel like I'm gonna go
Mm.
mess somebody up right now. I've got like this action score underneath walking to Starbucks with my laptop. Um, but
Oh, the
yeah,
Repeater soundtrack,
yeah,
or
yeah, yeah,
oh yeah.
yeah. I'm curious, like approaching a project like that, like going into, into an action film. Like, there's so many routes to go. And that sounds even silly to say because like there's with every department, I guess there's a million routes to go. But you went very much like an electronic score, like used a lot of like electronic guitar, like going for that electronic sound. Like what when you're sitting down on a project, is that just conversation with the director going, hey, here's the tone and style? Is it something where you're coming in saying, here's what I think based on the script and seeing if that meshes? Like, what's that first step to determining like, hey, let's go more classical or let's go more electronic? What's that decision process look like?
Yeah, no, awesome question and super interesting because it kind of yeah, it's it's interesting because it goes to what you said earlier about there's so much work on the back end and you're working as a
Hmm.
team. And that's one of the things I really that drew me into composing for film because I like the idea of you're working with the team, you're helping to bring a vision to life. Um, and for Repeater, yeah, I actually had a couple different ideas. I mean, the musical themes and stuff were there, but I wanted to do a little bit more mixture, a little more organic sounds. Like we recorded live violin, some live guitar, and the producer was the one that brought this vision to me, saying, "Hey, like I don't want like that violin's cool, but I don't want a regular violin sound. If it's going to be there in certain aspects, very subtle, but." He's like, I want to do something out of this world, something different than we've done on any other show, and really just try to create some unique sounds. So it was in collaboration with the producer actually that the score to Repeater came to be, as far as all the different um, sounds there. There's a scene in the movie where the lead character gets shot with some buckshot from a shotgun, and he's kind of like getting kind of dizzy or fading. He's trying to go find his girlfriend's place to get some help or whatever. And in the scene driving, that you could see him just kind of seeming delirious. And we used the violin, just kind of playing this drone type of sound, but then we filter it with a bunch of crazy, weird delays, where it just sounds almost like a whining something. I don't even know how to describe it, but it was the collaboration of the producer to come up with those type of weird sounds. The same with the guitar, even the opening scene. You hear the guitar, it's there, but you hear it kind of has a sort of wash to it that's just a different sound that kind of is almost dreamy and takes you somewhere else.
Yeah. How much of that is done in like post on the music? Like, is it going in and tweaking it digitally, like all of that? Are you trying to record, are you recording and then making that decision, or is it something like you're recording knowing like, hey, I'm going to do this in the edit? And again, this might be the most elementary question, but it's something like, I can wrap my mind around shooting something that's there, or designing something that's there. But that when it comes to, same with when I interview VFX people, I'm like, you're taking something that doesn't exist and crafting it. This is
Right.
very, very interesting to me.
Yeah, no, it's a little bit of both for sure. When we did the violin recording with Regina, she was using actually an electric violin, and we plugged in through some different delays, and it had some effects already processed. I did get the raw recording too. It's always nice to have that raw um, asset there, just so you can always go back to and mess with it if you want. But we had that, and it was cool, but it wasn't as far as we wanted to go. So we did do some work just in the studio, but then yeah, there was a most of everything, especially with Repeater, was done in the post process of just trying different things, running the audio through different channels, and seeing what we can come up with.
Yeah, I did an interview recently with a composer, and again, I was probably asking very elementary questions, but I was asking, about just the editing process, because so much you think of, we talked about in that episode, we talked about, Jurassic Park and the music swelling when the helicopter wide shots are there and then coming down when
Mhm.
they're inside the helicopter, or Jaws when the shark's getting closer, or Indiana
Right.
Jones when it dies out and you hear the boulder rolling, all those moments that we think about
Totally.
that are
Yep.
iconic cinema moments, all John Williams, because, like that's the first ones that come to the top 10. Um,
Yep.
how much of a collaboration is that, or has that been for you with editors, or is it really just you get a final cut, you're scoring it, or have you had any back and forth saying like, hey, let's bring in some music here, let's let this cut last a little bit and let this shot play out so we can add this musical moment?
Yeah, that does happen. I mean, I guess for me so far it's been about maybe 50-50. Ideally they try to get it to like, okay, here's the picture lock, go
Yeah.
for it, do your thing. But there are times, and I always let the producer and director know too, like, hey, like we can get started sooner, just so we can start at least get some momentum rolling. And then if there's some minor edits here or there, we need to elongate something or shorten something, that's no problem to do. So
Mhm.
that's happened a few times, not too much collaboration with the editor on that. But however, I did work with the editor on Repeater a lot. So his expertise that he brought to just the cuts, and he did come up with a few different ones too, even towards the end of the score. But it
Mm.
didn't impact the writing too much. Maybe just a
Yeah,
couple scenes I had to elongate a track a bit.
sure.
But as far as a creative decision, it didn't have too much of an impact. But
Yeah,
it's amazing. I have such a huge respect for editors because they can really tell a story, or versus watching a movie and you're thinking, I don't know what is going on here. Like, what am
yeah,
I seeing? And then the editor
right.
could give a new cut, and you're like, oh, I'm following along now.
Yeah,
So it's really important. It's amazing what
yeah.
they do.
For sure. Well, I am curious too. One of the things I think about, like, directors before, and cinematographers before going to project, they're putting together, mood boards and, watching movies and cutting clips. And is that similar process for you gearing up to do a score? Like when you say like, hey, I'm approaching an action movie, here's a couple action movies I'm watching, thinking about how they approached it. Or is it something where it's like stand-up comedy where like, I don't want to know what their material is. I want to push that out of my mind because I don't want to accidentally replicate some of that.
Yeah, no, I prefer that. I prefer just to have a blank slate and
Mhm.
just have my own thoughts. But I mean, it does the temp is helpful because it gives me an idea of
Yeah.
where the producer, the director wants to go. Um, but typically, I mean, honestly, what's helped the most with me is just having candid conversations with the
Mhm.
director producer. What is this film about? What do we want people to feel? And that will direct me like, okay, this is what I got to do. A great example of that is the third movie I did was called Your Move. Starred Luke Goss as his directorial debut,
Mhm.
and kind of like a Taken movie, action, thriller, suspense, more thriller, suspense. And I remember thinking, okay, I'm gearing up for it. It's going to be a lot of whatever fighting, just tension, all this kind of stuff. And when I talked to him, I said, "So tell me, like, what's the movie about? What's the tone?" And he was a great director. He's like, "It's a love story," and it totally made me pause. I'm like, "Wait a minute, a love story? What are you talking about?" he's like, it's about how far a guy will go to take care of his family. And he's
Yeah.
like, that ending scene where my character rescues wife and daughter and take him out of that dungeon that they were in. He's like, that's the whole heart of the movie and what the what it's really about. And
Mhm.
that just like really inspired me. Like, oh, it's that's fantastic. That's the kind of
Yeah.
stuff that really just got my emotions stirring. And I went to piano and just started playing out, working out the theme based off of that direction that he gave me.
Yeah. Yeah. You've collaborated with a couple directors a few times. R.L.S. Frazier, obviously worked with a couple times. Those collaborations with the directors, does that help over time building a relationship? Like, do you feel like you have kind of a second, you know, uh, I'm blanking on the word, but like, do you feel like you have kind of a rapport with them where you know what they're going to ask for at a certain point, or is it always each project like no idea where they're going to come in on it? You know?
Yeah, no, generally yes. I've had the awesome opportunity to work with Frazier since I first started. My
Hmm.
first movie I did, Larry brought me in on it. It's called Rumble with Gary Daniels. It was on Netflix for a while, and Larry wrote the main title, and then he brought me in to score the rest of the film. That was my first introduction working with Frazier, and then he really liked the work I did on Rumble, and we just continued the relationship. Um, so it's typically, he knows what I do. I typically know what kind of what he's looking for. So most of all of our movies, it's a pretty smooth process, and it's
Hmm.
cool too with Frazier because he's a musician. And I remember when I was studying this too and learning, you kind of hear people say, "Oh, if you got a director who's a musician, that's gonna be trouble because he's just gonna
Yeah.
like nitpick every single thing you do." But that's like the furthest thing from the truth. From the truth with Frazier, he's musical and he has an idea, he has thoughts in his head, and he'll throw out suggestions to me, and then he's like, "But I want to give you the freedom to just chase after it."
Hmm.
Um, so it's standard in the sense of I know what our process is, but every movie, even when it's the same genre, I'm always curious to hear, okay, what's the tone going to be, or what's
Yeah.
the vision of how it's supposed to unfold, because that'll always be different typically, for
Right.
sure. But
Right.
our working process is the same.
I'm curious. So like that's been smooth sailing that relationship. What's your biggest pet peeve as a composer? Like what's something that when it happens on a project, you're like, this just really hurts my ability to create, like this really hampers my, and I've heard a couple examples like, oh, people get so drawn to a temp track or the editor uses this type of music that the director falls in love with. And, there's all these little things like, is there anything that has ever happened? You don't have to name names, though we'll probably get more views if you do. No. Do you ever have any experiences where, people do something that you're like, oh, that really just, shot me in the knee doing this project?
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing is like communication, and it's interesting because it's not just the in show business, it's like really anything that we do, right? If if you're in communication with somebody, whether it's a relationship or business, work, creative projects, whatever, then like, okay, at least you can, move forward.
Yeah.
The thing that's been the toughest for me is with and it's not, I guess given the benefit of the doubt to a lot of professionals or whatever, people are busy and they got a lot of stuff going on. But for me, when I'm trying to deliver a project, if I'm trying to make sure I'm on the right track, or I'm trying to communicate, or I need something, and I just don't hear anything, that's that's the toughest for me to be able to create, because then it's like, okay, I feel like I'm flying blind. Like I'm trying to,
Yeah.
look at my instruments, so to speak. Where am I going? Am I on the right heading? Make sure I don't crash into a mountain. And if I'm not seeing anything, if I'm not getting any feedback, it's like, okay, I'm just
Yeah.
going to assume everything's good. And then sometimes that happens. And then, oh, well, we wanted this. Like, okay, well, now it's too late because now you want a delivery next week. And
Yeah.
I can't just, snap my fingers. I think that I've talked to some other just audio professional peers, and they've mentioned that too, that they've seen that within different aspects of recording arts where there seems to be a disconnect sometimes with people outside of music that think, oh, just whatever, just deliver the score tomorrow,
Yeah.
for whatever. Like it should, and not understanding the full complexity of what's involved, the cost, the time, the effort that's put into it. Not everybody. I mean, obviously, a lot of people do understand like what goes into it, but I think there's a general, oh, whatever, just get the score done and deliver the, we got to deliver the movie. And there's
Yeah.
no consideration into your process necessarily.
Right.
So that would be my biggest challenge that I found I will have to kind of fight against or
Yeah.
work in spite of. I don't know. Sometimes it's just okay. Situations I'm in, I just gotta adapt and roll with it. Do the best I can.
Yeah. Has that been worsened by, like during the COVID period, a lot of stuff switched to working? I'm sure you did a lot of stuff in home studio. If I had to venture a guess, like everybody, probably a lot more working
Everything.
remote.
Yeah.
Does that worsen that? Has that affected your ability to collaborate on some of these projects where a lot of these meetings are not happening, where you can sit side by side and work through a project like that?
I don't think so, to be honest, Eric. Because when I did my first movie like 10 years ago, Fraser and I never met in person. I mean, I
Hmm.
was working with Larry, so I would do stuff, and then Larry would QC it before it got sent over to Fraser, and then Fraser approved it. But all of that was done remotely even before COVID.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I mean, I could see that there could be an issue there, but it's weird. Obviously, and I know it's a different topic than film scoring, but it's weird because we had like you and I can communicate easily anytime, anywhere with all the technology available to us. But it seems like with that, maybe sometimes we take it for granted and we just kind of get
Yeah.
busy with everything else and we let things go. And when you're making a movie and it's getting distributed and everything, there's a lot of pieces in play. There's a lot of
Hmm.
stuff going on. So I understand that producers and directors are juggling a lot of different things. Um, but that's the challenge that we all have to try to kind of get grips with is how do we communicate to make sure that everything's moving forward? Because at the end of the day, it all serves the purpose of getting the film done, getting it the best it can be, and then getting it to delivery.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that's been a big thing I've noticed. Like, it's not so much like the quantity of time because like you might still get on a meeting, but it's like the quality of that time. Where people come in and like you said, they take it for granted. Like where it's like they threw a shirt on and they sat down, or whatever.
Yeah,
Like they jumped in a call, and the conversation quality just dips. It feels like a lot of times when you're going remote, and I have to imagine too, like
yeah,
dealing with people who are already working and tired and long hours, like it's gotta worsen that at times, but it can be
yeah,
save you time too.
yeah. No, 100%. I think another aspect of it too is just the studio that you're working with.
Hmm.
Um, there's some studios and producers that are just like, I just want to make an action movie. I know I can flip it. It's like they're flipping a house.
Yeah.
It's like whatever. I'm not going to live there. Just this is good enough. Someone's going to buy it. I'll make a profit, turn, flip,
Hmm.
move to the next one. And a lot of these projects can be like that. So you're having to balance like, oh, I want to creatively put this together, and then also thinking, well, I just have to make a deadline. Like, which one is the priority? Because often you
Yeah.
can't do both. It's not like you're Beethoven sitting at a piano, and just the glass of wine. Like I'm just going to compose and bring this beautiful thing to fruition. It's often just like I need this delivered. Like I need this house painted by next week, and you're like on
Yeah.
that kind of a type of a task.
Yeah.
I still get joy out of it. I just love writing music to picture, but there is a balance between sometimes with certain shows, that's all they care about. Like Chris, just deliver action, tension, and we just need it done by the state, period.
Yeah.
And then Repeater is actually more of the opposite, where the producer and the editor spent a lot of time. They made the effort. I'm down in San Diego, actually. They're up in LA, and they would drive down to my home studio in San
Mm.
Diego, and they made it a priority. Like, no, we want to like get this as right as possible, and we would spend days in the studio, just super caffeined up, a ton of caffeine, and just going through every single cue. Sometimes certain sequences, certain frames, like okay, right here when this happens, we want
Hmm.
that chord to hit this part, and that was a big collaboration. But their vision was, obviously they sold the movie, and Saban Films has it, and it's a great success. But they were very adamant about getting it as perfect as they possibly could. So when you have those kind of producers and filmmakers involved, then you're gonna have a lot more hands-on, a lot more making the effort to like, I don't care where you're at, I'm coming, we're gonna sit in the studio and we want to go through it together. Um, versus the other mindset of just whatever, I just need to deliver it at this date. That's fine.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the
Yeah.
next one.
where like in their mind it's like a step away from like let's use stock footage and a stock track and just get it done. Yeah.
Yeah, dude, no, that happens sometimes. That's the back to what you said, what's kind of frustrating. That could be frustrating sometimes too.
Yeah.
It's like, I think this is a much better route. Well, whatever. We got this free royalty, whatever. We're just gonna throw that in there. Like, okay. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's only so much control you can have. I think I remember Danny Elfman saying one time about how he doesn't like going to. I mean, I could be wrong, but I swear I could remember seeing an interview where he said he doesn't like going to premieres or screenings because it's always different than what his original vision was.
Hmm.
It's always different. So he's like, I don't like going and watching the movie because it's going to be different than what I originally delivered. um,
Yeah.
but there's a lot of truth in that. I mean, once you surrender, it's like, okay, and then they got to do its best with it. That's how it goes.
Right, right. Has there ever been a change done to something you've worked on? And maybe you could give both answers. A time it was frustrating or a time that it was there ever a time though where something was adjusted and you thought it was to the betterment of what you had done? Like where, someone did change something you did or change the timing of it or change the moment where it's used where you feel like it was an improvement or like, oh my God, I can't believe I didn't think of that. And then I guess on the flip side, which I'm sure there's probably more of those where someone changed something and you're like, crap, that like really ruined what I was trying to do at that moment.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's even been stuff where I had a cue and then they swapped it out for a cue that I did in a different movie. That they're like, well, we like this one that you did from this other movie. We're going to throw this in there. And I'm listening. I'm like, all right, like I don't think that's the best choice, but I mean, even though they swapped it out with another piece of music that I did, there's still times where I'm like, okay, like I don't think that's best. I don't like how that's sounding compared to what we did before, but whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and then, well, using repeater again is a great example of the positive side. Like I mentioned earlier, where I kind of had a certain idea of orchestration wise, where certain cues were going to be, and then the producer was like, "No, we want to totally switch this around," and we kind of I felt like repeater was like going to the gym, like putting more weight on the bar. Like, I don't know if I could lift this. Like, come on, we're just gonna like, force you to go out of your comfort zone. And then when it's done, I was like, oh wow, dang, this is a lot better. This is cool. I didn't know that that was there. And sometimes you need someone creatively to push you, and it could be, sometimes just mentally tiring. Like, okay, like I'm done with this cue. I'm done with the show. I'm ready to move on
Yeah.
to the next one myself. But then when you got a producer, director being like, no, that's not, that's almost there, but we need to try this. And you're like, oh gosh, okay, fine, I'll do one more rep, you know.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
and, then, and then it comes out better. Like, oh, dang, that's really cool, So there's definitely a huge benefit to that. Again, going back to the whole working with the team, because even though you may be the subject matter expert when it comes to writing music and writing a picture, all these different filmmakers have a huge value in how to tell a story, what they're trying to tell. And the more I could understand that and see that vision, the clearer I can run towards that and, try to deliver what they want.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Love that. Well, I'm gonna move us into our closing segment in a little bit here. But I gotta ask, I was reading an interview you had done and you mentioned like some projects you'd like to work on. And you threw out like the Mission Impossible franchise, with the Chris McQuarrie, Mission Impossible movies in particular.
sorry,
Um,
sorry if it's too obvious. I genuinely love those series, but
yeah, yeah. I mean, tell me just a little bit about like maybe some ideal projects that you'd love to work on. I mean, I know you mentioned Mission Impossible, which like it's one of the best action franchises going right now. And also
100%.
like speaking of music being a character, like that theme is incredibly iconic. And now we've seen, you know, the rocked out version of MI2. We've seen the very traditional
Right.
orchestral version that they're pushing now for the new movie. Like I'm curious, what's like your favorite take on that score specifically? I know that's not something that you worked on, but I'm curious, like your perspective looking at like what's the best version you think that's been done, and if you were to step in, like where would you steer that ship toward as far as the music goes?
Dang, that's a big question. So we got another hour, right?
Yeah, right.
um,
Hey, whip out
dang,
all the
that's
tracks. Here we go.
right. Let's go. Start analyzing it one by one. Um, no, that's a great question. Shoot, I think I remember one that really stuck out to me, especially musically, and just the whole film I loved was, I think it was Fallout. Was that that was the last one, I believe, right?
Yeah.
I think it was Fallout. Yeah, and then I know they got another one next year, which I'll be stoked about to go see. But Fallout, it just from a film standpoint, an action movie, just it's so interesting because there's so many different things that are obviously like all the actors are top notch, the cinematography's so cool, the story's very engaging, but there's all these different things that are happening too. So there's a lot of spice and variety to constantly keep it moving, from that opening
Mhm.
scene all the way to the end. And musically, I think I apologize. I blanking on the composer. I think it might be Lauren Balfe,
Lauren
maybe. Was it
Balfe. I don't
Lauren?
know how you pronounce his name, but yeah, it's Lauren Balfe.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
I'm impressed with myself. I wasn't sure. I'm like, I think it was Lauren. I'm a big fan of Lauren. I really like his stuff. He's very, very talented and just amazing. But I like the different themes he had. And there's a certain scene at the end where Tom Cruise is running around and he goes through the cathedral and everything, and there's this piano melody that starts to kind of come in and dance around with that whole chase scene. And he had a sensitivity to the different action scenes to make it interesting, where he didn't just go with the obvious of like running drums and percussion and that kind of stuff was going
Hmm.
on. He had a lot of different elements to just with as the film had different scenes and cinematography that made it appealing to the eye. The dialogue made it like you were sucked in the story to keep what's going to happen next. Musically,
Hmm.
he did the same thing,
Yeah.
and that's something I always strive to do. That's the kind of the goal of like, okay, how do I keep this going? How do I keep it fresh and interesting?
Yeah.
Um, so to your question on if I had the opportunity to work on something like that, where I how I would come in, um, always goes back to again with that relationship, that conversation with the director and producer on tell me more about this. Let's go deep into the story. What do we want the audience to feel? What is the tone? Um, and then that's the starting point of like laying the foundation. Like, okay, this is what I'm. This is the palette that I'm working with. And then with a movie like that, again, just trying to come up with different, unique sounds, experimentation, different time signatures. With obviously, Mission Impossible. There's a lot of different drama that's going on. So I think as a percussionist and a drummer myself, being more intuitive with that, I love experimenting with different time signatures, maybe layering one time signature on top of another with different instruments. So it's kind of sounds off and it can kind of mimic what's on screen when there's like some sort of unstableness happening.
Hmm.
Um, but that's how I position it. So I'm looking forward to one day having the opportunity to dive deep into something like that.
Well, it seems like Tom Cruise will be making these movies for like the next 50 years. So, so plenty of
I
time.
gotta have my shot sometime, right? Hey, Dolph.
Right.
I mean, already, yeah, yeah. I just
Mission
have a
Impossible
chance,
34. It's gonna happen.
right? It's gonna
No,
be awesome.
it's
Then we'll be talking again. Talk to me about
right.
Mission Impossible 34.
Yeah, exactly. No, love that. Well, I want to get your perspective on these, and I keep moving this segment earlier and earlier because these questions spark a lot of good conversation. But I ask
Yeah.
these questions to every guest that comes on the show, and curious to hear your answers. First and foremost, which of your projects do you think is the best representation of you as a creator?
Um, I'd say right now, as of right now, I'd probably have to go with Repeater for sure. There's just a lot that went into it, a lot of experimentation, the score in the picture, a lot of cool action scenes. I had a blast writing with Gary Daniels. Played the villain in Repeater really well, and he's an amazing martial artist and talent there. So writing those action cues to his stuff and his performance on screen was really really great. Um, yeah, probably Repeater for right now. Definitely, there's a part of me that also leans more to more dramatic emotional stuff, but that's typically not as much. You don't see that as much in action movies, more in drama. So I did do a short film called Inclusion a couple years ago, and the main titles to that is more about pulling at your heartstrings and just representing a struggle and a step forward in spite of odds against you, and that's something that's really representative. I feel like to me, where I was really throwing my heart on the line with that theme. So sorry, I
Well,
kind of gave you two answers there with both of those.
that's okay. Two for the price of one, so that's great.
Yep.
Um, what do you think is the best decade of film history? And I'm sure this answer is going to be influenced by music of films during that period, but what decade of film history do you appreciate the most?
Dang, that's tough.
This is the one that always is like just dead silence for like 10 minutes of like,
Well,
hmm,
I'll tell you this, like what definitely respect the most and have the most like awe for would be, I guess, I mean, I'm probably wrong on the decades, but I would maybe somewhere between the 50s and 70s. But the early days of film scoring, Marvin Hamlish, obviously John Williams, a lot of these, the old Hitchcock movies, back like, during those times, because nowadays the technology we have is just unbelievable, but you see some of those old videos of these composers and they're literally at a piano, like watching you know, a, a scene, like, through a projector or something. And they're
right.
just explaining to the director, oh, here's where the woodwinds come in right here on the piano. And
Mhm.
here's this, and that the level of musical skill and dramatic instincts to be able to communicate that vision versus, hey,
Yeah.
here's my demo with all of these amazingly sampled instruments that I bought for $200 from Native Instruments. Like
Yeah.
that's a much easier or way to show a director and producer, like, this is what the score is going to be sounding like.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that there's a value every single decade as you see music change when it comes to music
Mhm.
to picture. And when you see like the 70s and 80s too, you see a real big shift in the tone of film scores for sure. Much
Right.
a little more electronic, that 80s style. And then once we get a little more towards modern times, you see Hans Zimmer kind of created that sound, and then everyone's kind of going towards that route. Um, so I think there's a value, there's a lesson within each decade if you were to be teaching like a course
Yeah.
on music for film. But the one I had the biggest respect for and interest in are those early days where they're just
Mhm.
at the piano trying to communicate, and then the director has no idea what's going to happen until they're at the stage, like with the orchestra, like, oh, this is what it's going to sound like, and this
Yeah.
is what it's going to how it's going to connect to what's on screen.
Yeah. I've never thought about it till you were just talking about because the 50s, you know, period and early 60s, was a period for like film that was very repressed in a lot of ways. Like, and it gets,
Yeah.
when we're talking just pure favorite decades, like a lot of people go like, oh, the 50s is the worst, and like the early 60s is the worst. Um, but what's interesting is that with music, like it's one of the few things that I feel like wasn't necessarily held back because it's music. Like its visuals were very held back, writing was very held back. There was a lot you couldn't say, a lot you couldn't show. But you think of
Yeah.
something like Psycho, like that movie's scary because of the music. Or you think of, I mean, Bernard
Yeah.
Herrmann's scores for all of Hitchcock's, movies that he worked on is stands out so much. Where like even when the movie couldn't deliver 100% on its climax or couldn't deliver on a scene that probably would have gone a little bit further in a different period, like the music went there, and so it's interesting
Yeah.
thinking about that expression just being kind of untethered for a lot of those periods where everything else was so strict. um yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting point for sure. Yeah, I love it. And it was pretty dramatic too. You could think of like an old black and white scene. You hear like a violin go, "Da-da-da-da-da," just this
Yeah.
huge run, but it's like at the same time, it's not distracting. It's just really enhancing the emotion that's happening on screen.
Right.
Um, and you're right. I mean, it's cool even with other aspects of filmmaking. The special effects and the way that you again using Hitchcock, the way that he tried to show um, tension, try to get people at the edge of their seats was a lot more different compared to nowadays where you have all this technology. Back then it's like, okay, where am I going to move the camera? How am I going to have this come? We're going to do this. Obviously a lot with the writing. How are we going to tell the story to keep people engaged?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, a lot of respect on filmmaking those days and how they brought the music together too.
Yeah, and I love that you gave Marvin Hamlish some love because I don't feel like he gets mentioned in a lot of conversations now. But
Mm,
like, The Sting is one of my all-time favorite movies. Like, and it's it's such a
Nice.
unique score. Even though it's funny, like a lot of people who are like historians go like, "Oh, the music doesn't match the time period," or whatever. Like it doesn't matter. Like it feels
Yeah.
right, And The Spy Who Loved Me is such like a beautiful piano score for such an
Yes.
epic movie. And
Totally.
Yeah, I'm glad his name got mentioned because it's somebody. He's just a fascinating person. His music always stands out. Like he's one of those guys. Like everything he did was like gold. So love that
Yeah.
answer.
No, that's so cool to hear you say that and talk about him because you're right. He was actually one of my biggest first inspirations, and I actually had a
Yeah.
chance to see him live
Oh wow.
conduct a pop show in San Diego.
Hmm.
It was like a jazz series, and he was conducting, and he was there. I got to see him live. It was really cool. And then I think shortly after that, actually, he passed away.
Yeah.
And I remember when that happened, I was like, oh shoot, like it actually, like I was like, oh dang, because he was such a big inspiration. And in the very beginning of when I started getting interested in the music for film, and so when I learned more about him, what he did, I was
Yeah.
and how he did it, like you explained, like with Spy Who Loved Me, that's a great, beautiful
Yeah.
example.
Well, and
Um,
seeing that in theater, I saw Spy Love Me in theaters when Roger Moore passed, and they
mm,
reissued it, and like hearing "Nobody Does It Better," like Carly Simon with like it was amazing, like it blew the
yeah,
roof off of the place. Like it's awesome.
so
And
cool.
if you haven't seen it, the Sound of 007 documentary on Amazon Prime is pretty cool. There's a lot of behind the scenes of him working on that, so definitely check that out.
Oh, I
Plug for
will.
them.
I will. Thank you.
So, um, what is the oh, I'm skipping ahead of myself. If you were given the green light to remake any film, what would you choose and why? And I guess we'll repurpose this. If you could rescore any film, what would you choose and why? Or introduce a new version? Maybe we introduced this with Mission Impossible already, but I'm curious if there's anything else you're like, I'd love to do a different spin on that, even if the score already is pretty great.
Oh yeah, no, definitely. Shoot, yeah, that's a tough one. I think okay, I'll say this as a challenge. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the score, but I would love to, um, if I had an opportunity to do something like that, it would to remix. It'd probably be Maverick that just came
Hmm.
out, the latest Top Gun movie. Um, Score was great. Like I'm not complaining, but there's definitely more heavy Hans Zimmer elements you could
Mhm.
sense in that, more of a modern score. And his team did a great job, and especially with
Yeah.
the main Top Gun theme, the way that they brought that in and how they reorchestrated that was beautiful. But I think that when I was watching that, I was like, I wonder how I could have done this for sure. Again,
Yeah.
not that there's anything wrong with it or it needs to be fixed, but just as a creative challenge, of like, okay, like how would how would this score sound if it was scored by Chris Bezold? What
Yeah.
what could I bring unique that would also make the movie um, wonderful?
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna backtrack really quick because I need to ask your opinion. And you
Go
mentioned,
for it.
you know, Spy Who Loved Me. I'm assuming you like action. I'm assuming James Bond is very familiar.
Oh yeah,
Um,
love it.
what's your take as a composer of, and it was omitted from the Sound of 007 documentary, and I was like so mad because I loved the score to For Your Eyes Only. What's your take on Bill
Yes,
Conti's score for that? Because it's so weird and it's like stands alone from all the other music, and to a lot of people stands alone in a bad way because they say it's too much Rocky or whatever. What's your take on that score? Because I've found very few people that agree that it's a cool score.
I do agree. I like it. For sure. Actually, I grew up like my dad introduced that movie. Like that was my dad's, I think, favorite James
Hmm.
Bond movie, and even like the main theme song, like was is
Yeah,
great. So there's certain songs, they always have their special, you know, James Bond
yeah,
title, whatever. And that one, For Your Eyes Only, the melody, it's catchy. The starting right there is great, but the score, no, I'm a fan. I like that it was something different. I think it played really well with Roger Moore and the even just the different scenery. Like when they're, I think the
yeah,
Alps, right? Or they're out there doing it,
Yeah,
all that. Like,
and it brings in like
yeah,
the
I thought
Greek
it was great.
themes when it's, more the Greek set. Like,
Yes,
yeah,
you
it's
hear
I
some of the
love.
saws when they're out there.
Yeah, it's such a cool score, and it builds in cool ways too because there's a lot of revenge elements. But it's I get it. I mean, I get it. It sounds like he had just come off of Rocky or was just going. Yeah, I think it just come off Rocky. So like you can definitely hear some of like the, I guess, like bell, like some of the sounds that he incorporated that were definitely like, hey,
Repurposed.
I just did this, let me do this. But
Yeah,
I mean like imagine someone like insulting your work and be like, it sounds too much like Rocky. Like
right.
it sounds like one of the best scores of all time. That's really a
Yeah,
bummer. But
yeah,
anyway,
totally.
I had to sidetrack and ask that. Um,
No, I agree with you. That's one of my favorite James Bond movies for sure. So between that and Marvin Hamlish, man, we're on the same wavelength for sure.
good to hear. Good to hear.
Yes,
Um,
sir.
so you love action movies. You love a lot of cool like drama thriller type movies. What's a film that people that like your music, people that are tracking with you so far? What's a film that people will be surprised to know that you enjoy?
Um, Surprised to know that I enjoy maybe. Well, I guess probably because since I all the stuff I've done have everything I've done has been action. I would think probably more emotional, type of film. Like King's Speech is one of my favorite movies. Um, there's drama and tension to it, but not in the sense of like there's no fights, there's no
Mm-hmm.
shootouts or nothing like that. But I really enjoy movies like that. Really, really good stories. Really good drama. That's just um, even without all of the extra action elements. So that I guess would potentially come as a surprise since all my
Yeah.
movies up to this point have been um, just fairly straightforward action movies. I do have a movie I'll be doing soon called Uppercut, and that's a dramedy. So I'm looking forward to
Mm.
that because that'll be a little bit of a switch. Um, and it's about a middle-aged guy who starts boxing to kind of find himself. And I
Yeah.
can relate to that because after I went through a breakup when I was in my early 20s, my sister actually recommended you should take up boxing, and I did, and just fell in love with it, and it just helped me
Mm.
grow as a person to another level. So when I heard about Uppercut, I'm like, oh yeah, sign me up, let's do it. And the
Yeah.
producers have already told me that they want maybe like a jazz type of a score, something different.
Mm.
So that's gonna be cool because if people look at my stuff, they see all these action movies. Now they're gonna get a completely different flavor that maybe they think, oh, Chris, the next movie. Wonder who's shooting who in this movie. Now it's gonna be like, oh, it's something a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, the last question I ask everybody, what's the best piece of advice you would give to an aspiring filmmaker who is listening to this?
I appreciate the question, and I'm humbled by it. I would say um, two things. One, obviously you hear all the time, like you got to be persistent, you got to be patient. Patience is huge. I've been doing this 10 years, and I've averaged almost about like a movie a year. um Done 8 feature films now, got 4 more lined up for next year, but it's taking me this long to like get to that amount of work. I've done other things too, in between the features, but as far as feature films go, it's been a slow burn, like averaging one a year has been good, but now like I did 2 this last year. Next year I got 4. But it's a lot of patience. Like I said, it's been almost coming up on a decade of just staying consistent. You got other work you got to do, still got to pay bills and everything. But if you just stay on it and stay persistent, that's that's the only way that you can know like, can I go to the next level, is if you just stay with it. Um, and then the other piece I would add to that, if you don't mind me doing another two for one, um, is when I was really struggling, even after doing a couple movies, and I was like, I don't know, am I going to be able to keep doing this, and
Mm.
how to what degree? I remember getting to a point where like, I was like playing piano, my family was there, like they just enjoyed hearing me just play some old standard tunes, and um, I remember just thinking like, I got to get to the point where if this is like as far as my music ever goes, like I have to be satisfied with that. And I have
Mhm.
to be content and happy and good with this. Like literally, like no, I'm good. I'm blessed that I could sit here, I can play, I can enjoy it. And if my family hears it and they feel and they enjoy it, that's got to be just as. rewarding to me than like, oh, I got an Oscar, I'm on Mission Impossible 34 or whatever. Like if that's like I won't be happy until I'm doing that, then I think you're in a lot of trouble. And I'm not saying you need to be complacent. Like I said before, you gotta be patient and keep persisting. But at the same time, you got to find a way to find joy with the craft,
Mhm.
with where you're at, and
Yeah.
not think, oh, well, once I get $100 million for this next
Mhm.
film, then I'll really be happy. You got to enjoy each project and find satisfaction there. And I've learned even just if I'm by myself, I just go and I just
Mhm.
am able just to express however I'm feeling just by myself at the piano. I could find joy and contentment in that, and you need to have that in addition to just thinking, oh, well, it means nothing unless there's a crowd here. It's like, no, it's like it's got to have purpose. And I think you're more likely to succeed on larger levels if you're
Mhm.
able to have that type of contentment when it's just you and your art.
Yeah.
Um, because eventually, because that'll come through. People will be able to tell whether what you're expressing is real and something unique and special, or whether you're just, you know,
Yeah.
just trying to get attention.
Yeah. Well, I love both of those pieces of advice because they complement each other so well. And I've been, you know, I feel like I test run things that I'm going to say out loud to like my wife or to like my family. I'll like be like, I think this is how things are, and like run that by them. And one of the things that I've been saying a lot the last couple months has been, I feel like 10 years is how long it takes to do anything, like real, like to
Mm,
really do it. You
right.
just mentioned like, doing a decade, I'm coming up on 10 years of working, doing, media and marketing and branding. And like, I feel like I'm finally getting to a point where it's like, I get, I've gotten it before. Like, I'm not saying like, oh, now I know what that is, but like to a level where like I feel comfortable saying like I understand this. Like I feel like I know how to leverage this. I know how to make the losses last less than the wins, and like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
people I talk to, it seems like, you'll look at people because they all of a sudden, like, they do this movie and you're like, oh, they're huge. Like they just got huge out of nowhere. And then you start
Yeah.
listening to interviews and it's like, yeah, for like 20 years, I was working as like a PA, I was doing this and this and this. And it's always encouraging. I think if you love what you do, it's encouraging to know, like, I just have to push for a decade, versus I think, writing on that second piece of advice you gave, like, if you're not fulfilled in the art at a small level, like in 10 years, like first, you're not going to make it to 10 years, but
Right.
once you get to 10 years,
Exactly.
like you're still not going to be fulfilled because that's not what you want to do. Like that's ultimately not the thing that's going to, give you joy every day to do. Like if performing your family is a drag, like performing, on a larger stage, doing something you don't like doing isn't going to be fun either. So I love both those pieces of advice. And I'm going to squeeze one more bonus question that ties into this really quickly.
Nice.
For someone who is, you know, maybe they enjoy it, but they're going like, is my limit, like, is it something that I enjoy doing for my family? Maybe it shouldn't be a career. Like, when do you listen to the outside voices or factors telling you should quit versus pushing through that pain, with nothing's guaranteed in life. So you could push those 10 years, not make it. Like, what would you say to someone who's going like, I don't know if I should quit pursuing this as a career and just do it as something for fun, or I should push through the pain to make it a career? I know that's like probably that could be an hour conversation as well.
Yeah, no, it's great. We should do another show where we just talk about the challenges of creative
Yeah.
art and professional. We could spend easily an hour on it. I'm sure. Well, let me ask you this: when you say the pain, do you mean like just the disheartenment, or like literally like I'm having like family issues because I keep
Like,
pursuing this?
well, I mean, it could be that. I mean, for me, I just look at it and go like, there's things, there's things that are worth. I mean, there's things that are worth pushing through because you have this goal on the end, or you
I
have this
see.
like, and I would say it's more specifically to like one of the things I think about as a creator all the time is like, where do you get your sense of, um, where do you get your sense of fulfillment from? And I think for a lot of creatives, it starts with this feeling of like, oh, people just clap for that. That's amazing. That rush was great. But like that doesn't carry you through the long hours or like the time learning your craft. And
Correct. Yeah.
also like you're surrounded by a lot of people as a creator, like your family at the piano are like, oh my God, that's amazing, honey, and then you get in front of producers going like, your music shit or your video doesn't look good
Yeah.
or your whatever that is, like you get the real
Right.
raw feedback. And all of those people could be wrong. So it's like, what do you anchor your value of your work to? So I guess I'm just asking, like, for someone who's going, do I listen to those voices saying like, hey, you're not there yet? Do I listen to them and like when they say like you don't have it, versus like believing in yourself saying, I do have it. I'm gonna keep pushing for this because I know at some point I'll be here,
Yeah.
you know?
Got it. Gotcha. Yeah, for sure. I would say that, yeah, twofold. Like you said, you got to have that fulfillment at the basic level. So if you're like, I love doing this and like no one else likes it, but you're like, I'm able to have this creative outlet and I feel good when I do it and I feel like I'm accomplishing something, then just keep doing that. But again, don't limit your fulfillment to be, well, I have to have somebody else like it. No,
Yeah.
you got, it's kind of, I mean, I guess it'd be like dating or something. Like you can't convince somebody else to like you.
Mm,
You have to be kind of content, fulfilled with yourself and for some reason that will attract other people to you.
yeah.
I mean, we all need outside affirmation
Yeah.
at the same
Yeah.
time. So I would say that if you're getting some sort of affirmation, that like, no, like you have something here, don't let it go. Then, hold on to that if it coincides with what, you honestly enjoy doing too. So that's how I would, continue to pursue. I mean, because when I was going through some of my times, I'm just like, I don't know, maybe I should put this up. I had, a few key people that are like, no, like
Yeah.
objectively, like there's something here. You just got to persist, stay on it, and that kind of motivated me. But then, like I said, I'd always come back to me too, thinking like, well, something I enjoy to do. If it never goes further than this, like, am I going to be
Mm,
happy with this, and do I enjoy it?
yeah.
And the answer was yes. I get a lot of fulfillment out of this, and it's something you just gotta stay on. Bill Evans had a quote. I watched this old interview with him, and he said how he told himself, he's like, I know that if I just focus on the music, I don't get distracted by whatever, trying to promote yourself or trying to
Mhm.
hustle, or whatever. I don't know. Just it's like if I just focus on the music, I know that like I could go into a closet and eventually somebody's gonna find me and be like, hey, we're looking for you. He's like, if
Mhm.
I just focus on my craft and just what I need to do, I'm just
Yeah.
disciplined like that. And that stood out to me too. Like, okay, just focus on the main thing, the main thing. It's easy to get distracted, especially in the day of social media where you see so much hype about whatever. People talk about this, I got this going on, and especially again in show business, people are always talking about their next big project. Do
Yeah.
they have
Yeah.
one? Maybe, maybe not. But there's so much, and it's easy to feel insecure. Like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? All these people have great things going on. But in reality, a lot of those people are probably thinking the exact same thing. Like, oh shoot, I'm around all these rock stars. What am I doing with my life? So it's a balance, man, because you don't want to be knocked off course with that type of insecurity. So you want to stay confident with what you know to be true and objectively true. And if you, number one, feel good about it and you enjoy it, keep going. And
Yeah.
then when you get some outside affirmation, hold on to that and keep running with it. Find
Yeah.
find find good, objective feedback if somebody's like, if you're concerned, like, okay, I know this person's a professional or I have a lot of respect for this person. Just be real with me. Don't just tell me I'm great. Like, should I keep
Yeah.
pursuing this? Should I keep throwing my music out there? Or should I just, close up the computer and whatever?
Call today. Yeah. Yeah. Love that answer. Appreciate you taking a few extra minutes to chat through that. I was
Yeah,
curious
no,
to know your
thanks.
thoughts on that. So, but yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
thanks.
so much for coming on. And I feel I feel like I could have I mean, we could probably go for another hour on some of this stuff, but really appreciate you taking the time to do it. And really love your work. Excited to see what you do in the future. And for anybody who wants to connect with you, see your work, like what's the best place to do that? And how should people keep up with what you're doing?
Sure. My website's chrisbezold.com. You can also Google me. You'll see my IMDb, see a list of stuff going on there. I'm on Instagram too, usually pretty active or I'm starting to get more active on posting latest trailers and behind the scenes, things like that. So you can find me at Chris underscore Bezold on Instagram too. So those three are probably the best places.
Awesome. Awesome. Love it. If you're listening to this, be sure to go check out those links in the show notes. And Chris, thanks so much for joining me.